Happy Apologetics Day, everyone. What is Apologetics Day, you may ask? Well, it is March 15th, 2021, also known as 3:15, as in 1 Peter 3:15, the verse that many in the apologetics world like to claim as their own. Always be ready to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, but do this with gentleness and respect. So happy Apologetics Day, and today we are going to be talking about COVID vaccine apologetics, actually. Apologetics, again, is just to give a defense. So in this case, we're talking about the vaccine, or the vaccines, I should say, at this point. Should you get it? Are they safe? What should we think about the conspiracy theories? And I'm sure many other questions that we'll get into on today's show with our guest biochemist, Dr. Fuz Rana from Reasons to Believe. He'll be with us to discuss these issues and I'm sure some other related topics as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. I'm Adam Tucker with Southern Evangelical Seminary, and this is Why Do You Believe? Well, thank you so much again for joining us, and we don't want that up there just yet. I hope you're enjoying the new format of the show, and I hope you're checking out our weekly content. Thanks so much to our team at SES that makes this possible to get this kind of weekly content out, and to all of our guests who are always so gracious with their time. I hope it's worthwhile to you. I would encourage you to check out last week's episode with Dr. Frank Turek, SES alum and president of crossexamined.org, where we talked about the absurdity of the Equality Act. You definitely want to check out that episode. Some really important and good and really helpful information there. And as always, you can find that on our YouTube channel. You can find that on our Facebook page, on the SES app, and at ses.edu. So I would encourage you to be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, like our Facebook page, click the bell so you know when we're going live, and you don't miss any of our content. And as always, we'll use our content as podcast audio later on in the week, so you can download the SES mobile app at ses.edu. So if you've been following the new format of the show, you know we like to start each week with a fallacy of the week. So let me bring that up here. And this week's fallacy of the week, again, fallacy is just a bad way of thinking or a bad way of arguing that we want to be on the lookout for, and also that we want to avoid committing. Excuse me. So our fallacy of the week this week is the appeal to pity. The appeal to pity. And this is when someone is attempting to persuade a person based on feelings of sympathy, feelings of pity, rather than the soundness of one's argument. So a few examples of this. I have 3 little boys, and our youngest is 4, almost 5. And his favorite phrase these days when something doesn't go his way is, "This is the worst day ever." And you're just supposed to feel so bad for him and change your mind because he's having just the worst day ever, regardless of what it is he happened to want to do that I said no about at the moment. Some other real-world examples you've probably heard, and I'm not making light of this at all, but this is simply a fallacy in argumentation. You may hear something along the lines of, homosexual people are killing themselves because you Christians say their behavior is wrong. Well, it's terrible when someone feels they should harm themselves, and no one should resort to that for any reason. And if we're doing anything to objectively contribute to that, then we need to certainly look into that. And bullying, those things are always wrong. But the fact is, if it is the case that saying someone's behavior is wrong causes them to kill themselves, then either the person saying this wants me to kill myself or simply doesn't care because they're saying my behavior is wrong. So you see kind of just the illogical thinking in that. That says nothing about whether or not the behavior itself is right or wrong. That requires argument. A couple other examples. If only people would care about the lost as much as they care about politics. Now, certainly, do people care too much about politics and idolize political opinion or politicians at times? Certainly. And that is always wrong. Making anything an idol is wrong. But it's also the case that many people, including myself, care about politics because we care about the lost and the implications that political opinions have on so many. So it's simply not the case that someone doesn't care, and we're trying to stir up these feelings of pity to make a point. And lastly, related to our topic for today, you may hear someone say, you have these vastly differing views on the state of the country right now, given COVID-19. Should we wear masks? Should we not? Should we open up businesses? Should we not? And rather than arguing a position, you may hear someone say, what do you mean you want to open businesses up? Don't you care about people? As if this person just doesn't give a flip about someone's health because they want to go to a restaurant or whatever. Well, it could be they care about the people losing their jobs because businesses are closing. So there are many other things to consider rather than just this appeal to pity that actually doesn't make the case that someone may be trying to think they're arguing for when in fact they're committing a logical fallacy. So don't do that. Be on the lookout for that. And that is today's fallacy of the week. So let me switch shots here and bring in our guest, Dr. Fuz Rana, the great Dr. Fuz Rana from our good friends and partners, Reasons to Believe. Dr. Rana, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, Adam, thanks so much for having me. It's just a pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to get to speak with you. If you are not familiar with Dr. Rana, you should be. He's a biochemist and the Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe. He's also an adjunct professor with Southern Evangelical Seminary, and just an all-around brilliant guy and nice guy. So I really do appreciate you taking some time to chat with us today, and thanks just in advance for the work that I know you've already done on this topic. So I look forward to you being able to share that with our listeners and viewers today.
Yeah, well, Adam, thank you. You're just way too kind. So I appreciate those nice words.
Well, as always, we like to have a little fun with our guests first and get to know you a little bit more. And if you're new to the show, we like to do a segment called On the Contrary in honor of the way that Thomas Aquinas would structure many of his writings when he would present arguments against his case, and then he would flip the script with a section called On the Contrary, where he would begin building his case. So we want to have our segment On the Contrary. All right, Fuz, I've got 60 seconds on the clock. I'm going to ask you a series of either-or questions. And as we learned in last week's Fallacy of the Week, these are all logical fallacies because there are more than two options, but I'm just going to ask you two options here. And so I'm really giving you a series of false dilemmas, but they're fun nonetheless. So if you're ready, I'll get the clock going, and
I'm ready to go.
We'll learn a little bit more about Fuz. All righty. The all-important toilet paper, over or under?
It doesn't matter.
So, you're a left coast guy.
As long as it's there.
As long as it's there. Hey, that's fair enough. Fair enough. Let's see. Steak or chicken?
Oh, probably chicken.
Okay. Very good. Are you an early riser or a night owl?
Oh, early riser.
Oh.
4 a.m. every day.
Are you serious? Oh, my goodness. I didn't know that time existed. Wow. Let's see. For the scholars, you always have to ask this. Printed books or ebooks?
Oh, printed books.
Okay. I'm really digging the ebooks these days, but I still see the benefits in the printed books. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, probably Star Trek.
Really? Trekkie.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. And let's see. Do you prefer phone calls or emails?
Phone calls.
All right, very good. Well, for our viewers and listeners, then Fuz's phone number is. I'm kidding. I don't even know your phone number actually. So, ask him all your questions and vent all your frustrations with what he's about to say about COVID-19. Just kidding. All right, let's get into the topic at hand. Actually, just found out this morning that a close family member has just been diagnosed with COVID. So I don't really know anyone at this point who has not been personally affected by the coronavirus in some form or fashion, from losing loved ones to getting sick themselves or maybe losing jobs or whatever. But I think it's impacted everyone by this point. So when it comes to the vaccines, let's ask the most important question first, if you don't mind me asking, and I think you've revealed this, so I feel safe asking this. Have you gotten your vaccine?
I haven't, but it's not because I don't want it. It's because I'm still waiting in the queue for my
Gotcha.
group to be eligible. But yes, when I can get the vaccine, I'm going to take it as soon as I can.
Gotcha. Okay. Very good. I feel the same way. I think I'm one group away from being eligible, so we're almost there. So, Fuzz, let me ask you, what can we know currently for sure? And maybe what are some unanswered questions related to the safety and the efficacy of the various vaccines? I think there's, what, three out there now that basically are being given to the general public. So where do we stand in our knowledge of those things?
Yeah. Well, all the data that I've seen is that all three vaccines, whether it's the Pfizer, BioNTech, the Moderna, or now the Johnson and Johnson or the Janssen vaccine, are all highly effective at not only preventing people from contracting COVID, but preventing the transmission of COVID as well. So this is really good news. These are, again, highly effective. In the clinical studies, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna show about a 90% effectiveness, whereas the um, the Johnson and Johnson vaccine is about a 67, 70% effectiveness. But I think we want to be careful about developing vaccine snobbery because these clinicals were done under different circumstances and in different ways. So you're not really doing an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at those effectiveness numbers. But from what I understand, there's virtually nobody that's been admitted to a hospital who has had a COVID-19 vaccine with COVID-19 symptoms. So even if you are vaccinated and you still contract COVID, the severity of the disease is far less than it would be otherwise if you didn't, receive the vaccine.
So this is interesting. I have not heard it put this way. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the? It's not really an apples to apples comparison as far as the efficacy of the vaccines. How do those trials differ?
Yeah, well, I don't know specifically the differences in the phase 3 trials that were done for Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna versus for the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. I don't know the specific differences, uh, but I do know that the Johnson and Johnson trials were being carried out at a later date than the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna trials, and so because of that, there were more variants in circulation for the Johnson and Johnson clinical trials, and there is some concern that these variants that are now emerging may not be effectively handled by the vaccines. And so the thought is that some of the difference may actually reflect just simply a different reality when the clinical trials were underway.
Okay, interesting. Fair enough. A lot of things that I'm hearing from even family members, and my wife's in healthcare, so we hear these things a lot because she's constantly getting asked questions, whether whether it's remotely related to her area of expertise or not. Uh, do you know very much about the safety concerns as far as side effects like Bell's palsy and other types of things that we've heard about in the media?
Yeah, everything that I see is that these vaccines, again, are really safe. And now we have to keep in mind that any kind of drug that you would take, any kind of vaccine you would receive, any kind of medical procedure, there's always, even if these procedures are highly safe, the drugs are well tested and deemed safe, vaccines are deemed safe, there's always a small percentage of medical treatment, any kind of drug, that type of thing. So to see some negative responses is not unusual or unexpected. But the fact of the matter is these vaccines look to be highly safe. The greatest concern would be anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock. There is a real small percentage of people that will develop anaphylactic shock if they take these vaccines. Again, it's a very, very low number of people. And so if you are somebody who tends to have strong allergic reactions, you probably want to consult with a physician before you do take the vaccine. But the good news is that, again, we are aware of this and you're monitored for 15, 30 minutes after the vaccine to make sure there's no concern with anaphylactic shock. So bottom line is that that's the primary concern. If you are pregnant or if you're nursing, I don't think there's safety data for those categories of people. There's not safety data for young children under the age of 16. I think there's work being done to try to collect that data. So if you're in those categories, you probably want to be, again, in consultation with your physician before you get the vaccine if you have concerns. There's no reason to think people in these groups would be at risk, but we just don't have safety data.
Sure. Well, and that's fair enough. And I should certainly, I guess, qualify all of our statements with, you're simply presenting your research. You're not a medical doctor, but you are a biochemist, and we're going to get into the more specifics of how the vaccines were created and things in just a moment. And obviously, I'm presenting my personal feelings about these issues based on my own research, and not necessarily speaking on behalf of the seminary, whether we're endorsing or not, or those sorts of things. This is just simply a conversation about the facts
Right.
as we understand them at present. So if any of our listeners or viewers want to take anything beyond that, then we would caution you for doing so. So um,
Right.
what I really want to get into, and what I think has been fascinating, and what I've seen you already have written and presented on, is the question I had in my own mind when all this stuff started was, how in the world were we able to safely come about a vaccine to COVID-19 in such an amazingly short period of time? It certainly doesn't help the conspiracy theories and all those sorts of things that are swirling around the internet. But how was this possible? And you attribute it to God's providence, which I think is really interesting, and I agree with. But how were we able to do this so quickly?
Yeah, well, and as you point out, I mean, in past experience, it's taken quite a bit of time to develop vaccines. I think the shortest time prior to the COVID-19 vaccines was on the order of about 4 years. Uh, and so it's just really this confluence of just right circumstances that really allowed us to have a vaccine so quickly. And that in and of itself, for many people is a point of concern. How could we develop a vaccine that rapidly and deem it to be safe? But in reality, these Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines are messenger RNA vaccines. And again, that's a new category of vaccine that's never really been used broadly, on the human population. So that again is a point of concern. But the fact of the matter is, the idea behind messenger RNA vaccines has been in play for at least 3 decades, where people have been working on developing these kinds of vaccines for literally 30 years plus. And we were even progressing these vaccines into human clinical studies uh, uh, for a number of other infectious agents, just at the point in time when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And so, literally, the people that were working at Moderna as well as Pfizer BioNTech simply had to readjust the sequence of the messenger RNA in the vaccines that they had already developed for other infectious agents. And they were able, within really days, to go into animal testing and then into human safety testing and small scale clinical trials. And so it was a confluence of events that were just at the just right time that, again, allowed us to so quickly produce these messenger RNA vaccines. If this pandemic had hit 2 years earlier, we would not be in the same position as we are today. So we were at the just right time when it came to developing these messenger RNA vaccines. But then on top of that, because we were in the midst of a pandemic and the prevalence of COVID-19 infections were so high in the population, it meant that you could get enough clinical data for the phase 3 clinical trials to do statistical analysis in a really short period of time. If we weren't in a pandemic, it might have taken a couple of years to get enough clinical data in the phase 3 studies to actually deem whether or not the vaccine was safe and effective. So unfortunately, the prevalence of COVID-19 cases actually is not a good thing because of the pain and the suffering and the loss of human life associated with it. But on the other hand, it was really fortuitous in terms of developing the vaccine very quickly and assuring, again, its efficacy and its safety.
Sorry, couldn't get my shot switched over there. Uh, so these are messenger RNA based vaccines. So what is, I know we can't get into this nitty gritty of this, but what is different about that than say a flu vaccine or something
Right.
we may be more accustomed to?
Yeah. Well, most vaccines or traditional vaccines are essentially injecting a virus into your body as a way to generate an immune response. But of course, you don't want to inject a live virulent version of the virus because that is essentially giving yourself the disease in order to gain the immunity, which is again, counterproductive. So what people do typically with traditional vaccines is they either take the virus and they heat deactivate it, or they chemically attenuate the virus so that it's no longer an infectious agent. So you're still exposing your body to the virus, and your body is now mounting an immune response to the virus. It's just that virus that you've injected is either dead or is again unable to cause the symptoms associated with the disease. The second generation of vaccines, which is what we're looking at now with messenger RNA vaccines, the idea here is not to inject the actual virus, but rather to inject parts of the virus so that our bodies develop an immune response to the viral parts and hence to the virus itself. So the messenger RNA vaccine, the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine are all exposing our bodies to what's known as the spike protein, the SARS-2 coronavirus spike protein. So we're developing an immune response to the spike protein, and that then protects us from the virus that is decorated or coated with these spike proteins on its surface. So that's kind of the principle behind it. And so, with the messenger RNA vaccines, what you're doing is you're injecting a piece of messenger RNA uh, into our bodies, and that messenger RNA makes its way to cells, and those cells will then produce the spike protein and present it to our body that then treats it as a foreign agent and develops an immunity to it. And so that's essentially, in a nutshell, the principle behind the messenger RNA vaccines. But these second generation vaccines are preferred to the first generation vaccines because the first generation vaccines are very difficult to develop. The people that are working with them have to handle the live virus. The production involves handling the live virus. You got to grow the virus in a lab. And so this is a very cumbersome, difficult to accomplish process. Whereas if you're just working with producing the components of the virus, these are very easy to produce in a laboratory setting or in a manufacturing setting using techniques in biotechnology. So it's safer for the people that are handling the vaccines. It's safer for the patient because you're not exposed to the actual virus, but to just parts of the virus. And it's also an easier development process and an easier manufacture process. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to go with these second generation vaccines.
And so you're saying even just 2 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do this.
Right, because we just simply didn't have the knowledge. We didn't have, again, the you know the clinical data to rapidly progress the messenger RNA vaccine into, again, a phase 3 clinical trial. So to me, the that perfect timing is, I see God's hand. I see
Sure.
this is God's providential care.
Yeah. Well, all good gifts come from above, so we we praise the Lord for that, for sure. And good time to give all a shout out to all the frontline workers and folks who have been working so diligently over this past year to help us through this crisis, and we are so grateful for each and every one of you and the sacrifices that you're making with your families and everything else. So thank you very much for that. Um, is it the case that because this is a type of coronavirus, and we have known about those for years and years and years and years, did that play a major role in just being able to identify it and sequence it and all that sort of stuff more so than if this was just a brand new thing we had never heard of?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is a vast number of coronaviruses, and we've got quite a bit of understanding about coronavirus biology, and so that clearly played into it. But again, it's remarkable that within days of having the sequence of the coronavirus genome available to us, or the SARS-2 coronavirus genome available to us, we literally were able to, or not we, but the scientists that Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech were able to go into the lab and produce a synthetic version of the messenger RNA from the genetic information about the amino acid sequence of the spike protein.
And what are the specific differences? Someone's asking this on Facebook. It's a good question. What are the specific differences between the three different vaccines that are out there right now?
Yeah, well, again, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccines are in effect the same vaccine.
Okay.
I'm sure there's some technical differences that represent trade secrets for the specific companies that are producing them,
Sure.
but in effect, they're the same vaccine. Now, the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, which is called an adenovirus vector vaccine, and it's also the type of vaccine that is produced by AstraZeneca. And then there's a Russian company, Gamaleya, that has produced, again, an adenovirus vaccine. Now, these are vaccines that we've got, a very rich history working with. In fact, there's some vaccines that are routinely given to young children that are adenovirus vaccines. I can't recall off the top of my head which ones those are, so I apologize for that. But the idea behind this is similar to the messenger RNA vaccines, but also different. Again, the objective is to introduce genetic information into our hosts, into our bodies, that will lead our cells to produce the spike protein. But here, instead of injecting messenger RNA that's encapsulated in the lipid nanoparticle, what you're doing now is incorporating the genetic information for the spike protein into an adenovirus, which is a virus that, again, we've got a lot of familiarity with.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're literally introducing a virus into our bodies that's carrying that genetic information to our cells to, again, instructing our cells to produce the spike protein. What researchers do, though, is they modify the adenovirus so it can't reproduce inside our cells. Therefore, it can't truly be an infectious agent,
Mm-hmm.
and it can't incorporate its genetic material into our genome. So we've modified it so that it's safe to introduce it into our bodies. It's just another vehicle to carry, again, the genetic information into the cells. The advantage of an adenovirus vector vaccine is it's far more stable. Messenger RNA is a highly unstable molecule. And so the researchers have to modify the RNA so it's stable. They've got to package it in this lipid nanoparticle to keep it stable. You have to keep these vaccines at extremely cold temperatures, which makes it a nightmare to manipulate,
Mm-hmm.
or for distribution and
Right.
in production and distribution, right? Whereas the adenovirus vaccines still have to be kept at cold temperatures, but it's much more moderate temperatures. They're inherently more stable, so they're easier to produce, they're easier to distribute, and I think they actually may be cheaper to administer than the messenger RNA vaccines. And the exciting thing about the Johnson and Johnson vaccine is that it's a single shot vaccine versus
Mm-hmm.
2 shots. And this is going to, I think, be a game changer in that it's going to make it possible for more people to be vaccinated, more quickly, but also to go after communities that are maybe vaccine resistant. So, for example, in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area where I live, there's concern about how are we going to vaccinate the homeless population. There's about 70,000 homeless people in the city of Los Angeles. How are you going to vaccinate those people? Or there's communities, African American communities, Latino communities that have a high level of vaccine skepticism. And so to expect people in these groups to be willing to subject themselves to 2 shots where they've got to schedule the second shot at the time of the first shot is a logistical nightmare. But if you can convince them to take a single shot, then you've successfully vaccinated them. So I think this is going to be a game changer, not only in terms of being, again, more efficient in getting more people vaccinated, but it's going to give us a tool to be able to achieve good levels of vaccination in communities that, for whatever reason are vaccine, resistant, or just going to be very difficult people to access, two separate times within that window of time to make the vaccines effective as possible.
Yeah, this is so fascinating, and just it's just so amazing, the research that goes into this and the abilities we have to manipulate all these things on a cellular and molecular level. It's amazing. So how does that alone to you speak to the existence of God, just
Yeah.
the amazingness of his creation?
Yeah, well, everything that we're doing with these vaccines is really not creating things from scratch, but really we're leveraging the knowledge that we have developed about how, our immune system works,
Right.
how our biochemistry works, and so, and when you look at the immune system, even though the immune system needs a boost with these vaccines to handle things like the SARS-2 coronavirus, it's still an incredible, physiological system that is so elegant and sophisticated. And in fact, it's so sophisticated that we really are scratching our surface of understanding the immune system. And if it wasn't for our immune system, we would have no hope of living in the world that we live in. So you could see the immune system is not only, again, the handiwork of the creator, but again, part of God's providential care for human beings. But when you think about, again, what's going on at a biochemical level, when you get the messenger RNA into the cell and it's being translated into proteins, all those biochemical operations are carried out by these highly sophisticated molecular scale machines that are far more sophisticated and superior than to anything that we would produce. But yet at the same time, they bear an eerie similarity to the types of machinery that we would produce, or the types of manufacturing systems that we would develop. And so, you see evidence for God's handiwork just in the sophistication of the biochemical systems and the biological systems that are involved. But even more so, the fact that as human beings, we have this wherewithal to be, in a sense, masters of the world that we live in. Now, that's kind of a loaded statement, and it's, going back to Descartes, where we're going to be the lords and the masters of the world around us. But that, in a sense, is a biblical idea, that we're image bearers and that we've been given, authority over this creation, that we are to be caretakers of the creation, that we are to subdue the creation and to use what's been present in the creation for humanity to flourish, right? And so, the biblical idea that again, we have this authority to handle the world around us and to use it for our advantage is, again, to me, evidence for God. But it also highlights our exceptional nature as human beings. We're the only creature that has ever existed that is able to understand the world around us and then to use that understanding to develop technology. That speaks to, some manifestation of the image of God. So even the development of these vaccines is, in a sense, implicit evidence that we are image bearers, if you think about it in those terms. And then, of course, ultimately, science itself is predicated on a Christian worldview. To think that the world around us is intelligible, that we have the wherewithal to understand it, those are biblical ideas, that the laws of nature are constant, and so what we learn about the world today is true tomorrow.
Hmm.
These are biblical ideas that laid the foundation for science. So, and so in many respects, when you think about what's going on, you know, from the fundamental, biochemistry and biology to, you know, our ability to manipulate the world around us, and to the providential care that God has put in place in the creation, to even the influence of the Christian worldview, to me, that screams of God's existence in so many different ways. There's so many different arguments for God's existence you could marshal, I think.
Yeah.
And not only God's existence, but the biblical God.
Right. Right. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the molecular machines do too. So it's really cool. Uh, so, based on your research, what risks are you aware of for any mutated strains of COVID 19 having the ability to bypass the
Right.
current vaccine's effectiveness and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, right now this is a real concern. Now, the variants have been arising the entire time that the COVID-19 pandemic has been in play. So over the course of the last year, there's probably been, I don't know, arguably 12 to 15,000 different variants that have emerged. So the emergence of variants in and of themselves isn't surprising or isn't inherently concerning. But what is concerning are those variants where the genetic changes that are taking place in the spike protein, which is again the target for these vaccines. And so, if the changes in the spike protein are such that it impacts the binding of the spike protein to the host cell surface receptors, which then, if that binding becomes more effective and more efficient, it's going to lead to ease and transmissibility of the virus. And it could also mean that the virus has developed ways to evade our immune system. And so these two combinations of concerns are really, really very frightening. And it may mean that the vaccines that we have currently may not be effective against all of these variants, like the UK variant, the South African variant, there's a Brazil variant, there's a variant that arose in the Los Angeles area
Hmm.
called the California variant. And just because these variants emerge doesn't mean the vaccines are automatically not going to be effective. They may not be as effective as they would against the garden variety
Hmm.
SARS-2 coronavirus,
Right.
right? But with vaccines, you always have this issue of virus vaccine mismatch, where there's always some degree of ineffectiveness of the vaccine if you don't have the ideal match between virus and vaccine.
Hmm.
So this is an inherent problem anyway with vaccines. So there's no reason to think that this wouldn't be a problem also with COVID-19. This is why there's a lot of interest in developing the booster shots to help us, be able to manage, these emerging variants. But this is also why it's so critical that we get herd immunity as fast as we can, because the longer the virus is in circulation at high levels in the population, the more opportunity for new variants to
Hmm.
emerge.
Right.
So the quicker we get herd immunity, which arrests the spread of the virus, the faster we're going to be able to stave off the emergence of new variants. And even again, the variants that are in play, even if the vaccines are not completely effective, they still are going to be somewhat effective, and that's still important. It's
Hmm.
still a tool to help us battle off the hopefully, that what won't happen is another surge because of these variants. That's
Right.
the fear everybody has right now, is these variants could actually lead to another surge, which in spite of all the success we're having with vaccinations.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Uh, well, this has been enlightening for me. I hope our listeners and viewers have enjoyed it. So we like to close our show with a segment we call "I Answer That." So Aquinas would make his turn in his writings with the "On the Contrary" section, and then he would give his arguments, and then he would go back and answer all the objections that he gave at the beginning of his of the section he was writing on. So we're going to have our segment "I Answer That." All right, so tons of questions that are being asked, and I'm sure many others that people are asking that I haven't even thought of here. But let's hit some of the highlights at least. So you mentioned earlier that even though these were very technologically advanced vaccines with the messenger RNA and the spike protein and those sorts of things, that they were still safe as far as our genetics go. And I know that's a big thing that's going around the internet specifically, and sadly a lot of churches as well, that these vaccines somehow alter your DNA, and that it's just dangerous in the long run because of that. So is there a fear of our DNA being altered from these?
No, not at all. There's no way mechanistically that either the RNA vaccines or the adenovirus vector vaccines can modify our DNA. Now, with the adenovirus vector vaccines, there is a germ of truth because adenoviruses can incorporate their genetic material into the host genome. But these adenovirus vectors have been specifically modified in such a way that that can't happen. So there's no concern of our genomes being modified through these vaccines. There's just no mechanism that I'm aware of that would allow that to happen.
Okay. All right. Good answer. Very, very enlightening there. I appreciate that. I know that even some of my own family members, I know that's a concern that they've had. Another big one, especially for Christians specifically, is the role that aborted fetuses have had in either the research for these vaccines or in the production of, as I understand it, at least the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. What is the role of aborted fetuses in this whole vaccine production scenario?
Yeah, this is where we're going to get into some sticky ethical
Yeah.
terrain, you know. But and I'm going to say this ahead of time. I'm staunchly pro-life, and I believe that people that are pro-life could probably have differing perspectives on this. Good
Mm-hmm.
people could that are pro-life could disagree. Now, it is true that none of the vaccines that are in play require the ongoing use of fetal tissue for their development or for their testing or for their production. But the Pfizer BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines as messenger RNA vaccines don't require the use of human cells for their research and development. It doesn't require the use of human cells, for ongoing production. It did require the use of human cells for confirmatory testing. Now, for the adenovirus vector vaccines, this would be Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Gamaleya. You do have to have human cells for the production. Human cells were needed for the development and for the testing. Now, this is where things get sticky because the source of those human cells was from a single abortion and actually we know the province. It was a single abortion that happened in 1972 in Sweden, where the woman who terminated the pregnancy did it exclusively to end the pregnancy. After the abortion took place, researchers from a university in Sweden harvested the kidney cells from that aborted fetus and used it to develop a cell line called HEK293. That cell line exists of human cells that have been modified to the point that they are really non-natural cells that have been propagated for 50 years. And these HEK293 cells are used widely in biomedical research. There's probably no drug that's available on the market that hasn't been tested in these type search. And so this is where things get sticky. is that, again, for the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna, these cells were used for confirmatory testing for a limited number of laboratory tests just to make sure that the vaccine did what it was supposed to do in human cells. Now, for the, again, AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson, you need these cells not only for the research and development, but for the ongoing production of the vaccine itself. So the question is, are we now, are we in an ethically problematic arena if we hold to a pro-life position? And I'm just going to bring up a few quick points. My short answer is, as a pro-life person, I don't think these vaccines are in any way, shape, or form violating my conscience as, again, somebody that holds to a pro-life viewpoint for a number of reasons. One is, if I refuse the vaccine on either of these vaccines from a pro-life perspective, I am not preventing any abortions in doing so. Because again, it doesn't require the ongoing use of fetal tissue, but rather cells that were derived from a single abortion 50 years ago that have been cultivated and cultivated and cultivated, over that period of time. So, I'm a biochemist, I'm not a bioethicist, but I've read some writings from the Pontifical Academy for Life. I've read the writings of some pro-life Protestant bioethicists, and everybody seems to be of the opinion that, again, a pro-life person could take these vaccines in good conscience. Because again, by refusing it, you're not preventing an abortion from taking place. Now, I do believe that this is a wonderful opportunity for us that are pro-life people to call attention to the evils of abortion, and the Pontifical Academy, to their credit, challenged the biomedical research community to try to develop alternatives to the HEK 293 cell line that would not have any connection to abortions whatsoever. But the most people would say that again, the immoral act of abortion is so remote now from the actual development and administering of the vaccines that it's very hard to say that there's this one-to-one connection. And keep in mind that the immoral act was the abortion itself. Harvesting the cells from the fetus after the fact, since the abortion and the harvesting of the cells was in effect disconnected, is a secondary act that in and of itself is not inherently immoral, nor is the manipulation of those cells to develop a cell line, or the propagation of the cells, or then the use of those cells in research. So each act is, again, removing yourself from the actual immoral act. And then the last point, real quickly, is that it's not uncommon for us as human beings to enjoy good fruit from immoral acts. And as an example that I saw cited in the writings of these bioethicists is the railroad system in the United States was built by slave labor, by Chinese immigrants that were horribly exploited. So does that mean at any time that we get on board a train that we are somehow complicit in slavery, or are we complicit in exploiting vulnerable workers? So we can enjoy the good fruits of immoral acts without necessarily condoning those acts, and with the freedom, I think, to condemn those acts. And so the way I look at this from a biblical perspective is, yes, there was evil committed with the abortion, but that God is able to redeem even those things that are evil for good. So the amount of good that can come from these vaccines or from the biomedical advances that are used with these HEK 293 cells is, I think, is redemptive. It helps to redeem the evil act that was committed. So anyway, this is how I reason through this as a biochemist who's dabbling in bioethics. So I please recognize that. But I'm drawing it upon the good work of bioethicists that I respect. But I can see where somebody who has a pro-life orientation, who would completely disagree with me, and I would not be upset with that. I don't know that I would try to convince them to my side, simply because I think it's again a position of consciousness. But to me, the question I ask, that ultimately guides my decision making is if my action or inaction prevents an abortion, then that's the route I'm going to take. But if it doesn't, then I don't see any reason to refuse the vaccine.
So this is really fascinating because this is not something that I have researched greatly. I just see the headlines and those sorts of things. So I just want to make sure that I understand correctly. So we're not when you see the headlines, I'm thinking here are all these aborted fetuses and they're going in there with a syringe and all these goodness
Right.
these thousands of abortions we have each year and these evil scientists going in there with their syringes and doing this. But you're saying this was a single abortion from which we derived a cell line that has since been
Right.
propagated artificially from that one abortion,
Right.
and
Right.
that is what is meant by these vaccines or whatever the drug is has been involved with abortion in some sense. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Not that it belittles the evil of abortion by any means. I don't mean that at all. But
Right.
it certainly paints a different picture in my mind of what the situation at hand is.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is how I've reasoned through it. I'm not saying that my reasoning is flawless or that
Sure.
people couldn't legitimately object to the
Right.
conclusion that I've drawn. So this is why I said this is a really sticky
Mm-hmm.
area of gray where good people can take very different perspectives. But to me, the fact that we're talking about this is positive because it can be an opportunity to highlight the evils of abortion,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be an opportunity for us to remind the biomedical research community that they need to think through very carefully what they do, in the name of science and in the name of medicine.
Yeah.
That we want to make sure that we're not exploiting human life or devaluing human life as we attempt to try to do good things with medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense, and certainly it is a matter of conscience. And I believe I read last week, I think it was, one of the councils of Catholic bishops, or I forget the official title. I think their take on it was, if Johnson and Johnson vaccine is the only one available, then you should probably take it. If there's another option, then you should opt for that other
Right.
option, all things being equal.
Right.
But as you were saying, they were making the case still that it was better to take it
Right.
than to not, from an ethical standpoint.
Yeah, and you have to think about the common good, right? Is that if we don't get herd immunity, there's a lot of people that are going to suffer. There's a lot of deaths that can still result from COVID-19. So it's also a pro-life action to take the vaccine, not only to protect yourself and your family,
Mm-hmm.
but just people in the community. So this is a complex issue.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to rank them, I would probably, if I could choose, would be either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine over the Johnson and Johnson, just as a matter of conscience. But
Mm-hmm.
if the only option I have is the Johnson and Johnson, I will take it and just view that as God's hand of redemption,
Right.
that He's redeeming an evil act and is using it for good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that absolutely makes sense. And once again, I just want to reiterate for our listeners and viewers, it certainly is a matter of conscience, and we're just providing perspective here, and it's up to you to make your ultimate decision. So, all right, let's get into some of the crazier ones. Is the whole COVID nonsense, the whole vaccine and everything, really just a secret government ploy for control of the population?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think COVID-19 is real, you know, uh, and it's a real and it's a human tragedy to be certain. So I don't see this as the pandemic as something governments unleashed on the world. But I do think that what is to me unfortunate is I do think that sadly politics has entered even this pandemic where our response ought to be just a pure response of how do
Mm-hmm.
we solve this problem, as human beings who love one another. But politics has sadly entered it even into the
Yeah.
pandemic and all the things in California. which is a progressive state, that people in the state government have viewed the pandemic as an opportunity to advance a progressive political agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I don't think there's a conspiracy here, I do think that there are people from both progressive and conservative sides that are trying to use the pandemic to leverage their political power and to try to gain political advantage. And that to me is really, really unfortunate when that happens. But I can see why that people seeing that going on, why it's just steps away from saying, is this really a government conspiracy now, right?
Sure.
So I'm sympathetic to the line of reasoning, just simply based on what I've seen.
Mm-hmm. So do you think we should consider the vaccine? Well, we know it's not going to alter our DNA, and so they're not turning us into mutants or anything. Although, some mutant powers would be pretty cool, I must say. As a comic book movie fan, that would be pretty cool.
Yep.
But
lab accidents are great.
That's right. That's right. Should we consider the vaccine the mark of the beast then? I've been seeing that going around quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't see how it would function in that capacity. Now, there's always a bit of truth to all of these internet rumors, because Bill Gates has advocated for the incorporation of what are called quantum dots into vaccines, and these would be these microscopic particles that would be underneath, would wind up residing underneath your skin, that would fluoresce and give information to people, so it would become a way to have a permanent record associated with you for what vaccinations you've received. Now, nobody's doing this with the COVID-19 vaccines. It's too expensive to do. So people are not going to do this, at this juncture.
Mm-hmm.
But because Bill Gates has talked about doing that, where again, you would be essentially marked as whether or not you had a vaccine or not, this is probably the source of that idea that could these vaccines be the mark of the beast? And again, I think we would need to think long and hard about, is this really the best way to keep record of who's received what vaccine through these use of quantum dots? Because now it begins to raise, concerns, not only theological, but just privacy concerns as well.
Yeah. What was the movie Minority Report? It's like every day something from that movie seems to be becoming reality. It's it's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, so let's switch gears as we close here. And last question. We really appreciate you and Hugh and the whole team at Reasons to Believe, and we've appreciated our partnership over the years. We just celebrated celebrating our legacy, remembering Dr. Geisler and Dr. Rhodes, and coming into our 30th year of ministry. And just would like to hear from you, why you think on RTB's side that your partnership with Southern Evangelical Seminary and what Dr. Geisler started so many years ago with Dr. Rhodes, why that's important for you guys.
Yeah, well, we are an apologetics organization focusing on scientific apologetics, and with a strong eye towards using that for evangelistic purposes. And we just see SES as kindred spirits. We love the fact that your programs are oriented around apologetics, that you really are equipping your students to go into ministry with the ability to give a high level defense for the faith as they carry out, other aspects of ministry, whether it's missional work or pastoral work. And so we love the philosophy, that undergirds SES. We feel like you guys are kindred spirits. And, and in my experience, just interacting with the faculty, the staff, the students, it's just every interaction I've had has always been first rate. I'm so impressed with the quality of the people, not only in terms of scholarship, but in terms of Christian character and a real heart for reaching the world around us, using reason as a way to build a bridge, to the gospel. And so, in my mind, SES is one of the leading seminaries that, with the focus on apologetics in the country, maybe even in the world. And so to have an affiliation with SES to us is invaluable, for what we're doing. We see you as full partners. in everything we do. And we're looking for more ways to involve SES faculty and students in the work that we do at Reasons to Believe. And, and it's cool because I've had a number of students now that I've had in classes that are now working with Reasons to Believe in some capacity as volunteers, and so that's really, really pretty neat to see.
Nice. Well, we genuinely feel the same way. And, what's really cool for us is, someone like our mutual friend, Dr. Richard Howe, who we have on this show a lot, who's a young earth creationist and will be the first to admit that, he's neither a scientist nor a biblical scholar. So the two most relevant fields for him to hold a position on that view. But he speaks for the Reasons to Believe chapter in Atlanta all the time. And, I know has spoken for you guys at your conference and stuff before. So we just really appreciate the partnership and really appreciate your time being with us today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Richard Howell is a treasure. So
he is
for SES, and he's a treasure for the church. So
that's right.
It's an honor. It's an honor to call him friend, and it's an honor for him to make fun of me whenever he's around me.
Indeed, I echo those sentiments. So Fuz, tell us where folks can go to learn more about you, learn more about Reasons to Believe, and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, the easiest thing to do would be to go to our website, reasons.org. And you can access all of our resources and learn more about our organization. We also, all of us are on social media. We have an official RTB Twitter and Facebook accounts, but also each of the scholars at Reasons to Believe have their own social media pages. So you can like and follow and all those good things too. And we try to make a point of interacting with people as much as we have time to through social media. So if you got questions, you can ask us and we'll try our best to get to them.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, keep up the good work, sir. And thank you again for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. All right. Well, I hope you found that helpful and edifying. Hope it answered some questions for you. Maybe raise some more questions. So like Fuz said, find him on social media and be sure to interact. As always, this content doesn't happen in a vacuum. We can't do it without your support. So if you're interested in learning more about how you can partner with SES, whether it be financially or prayerfully, whatever that looks like for you, you can visit ses.edu for more information. And if you are interested in becoming a student, whether that be a certificate student, a degree student, maybe even just auditing some classes, I would encourage you to visit degrees.ses.edu/podcast. That's degrees.ses.edu/podcast. You can download a free ebook, 3 Reasons Seminary Education May Be Right for You, and you can learn a little bit more about what exactly makes SES a unique educational opportunity and choice for you in your further studies. And again, that's degrees.ses.edu/podcast. Well, once again, we call this show Why Do You Believe? And the only reason to believe anything is because it's true. So I hope you go share truth with someone today.
Providing an integrated approach to theology, philosophy, and apologetics that will equip you to proclaim the gospel, engage the culture, and defend the truth. That's SES.